Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for making the time so late in the day to come to the panel focused on the Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs. We already had a brief introduction to the SDGs, and obviously for those who happened to see John Kerry talk this morning would have got a really good indication of some of the challenges that we're facing. For those who aren't as familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, these were agreed by all of the 193 member states or countries of the United Nations. And my role as an Executive Director of the Global Compact Network Australia is to work with businesses right throughout Australia, throughout all different sectors, on how we can make the Sustainable Development Goals a reality and what opportunities there are for business to really invest in the SDGs and create a better future for everyone. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panellists, who you can see up here. I won't go into their bios, as you can all get their bios on their conference app. But going across, we've got Ben van Delden from KPMG, Andrew Loader from Mars Wrigley, Ryan from Sunrise, and Ely Court from Climateworks, which is let Ely explain it, but Climateworks works with Monash University directly. So perhaps we can just start, and we'll go along the order because it probably makes it a bit easier. But really briefly, what is it about your businesses that make the SDGs so important, and what's their relevance in the Australian context?
Well, Kylie, I think from a KPMG lens, it's really important for us to choose who we work with. So we've used the SDGs as part of our assessment process for working out which organisations meet our requirements for alignment to our purpose and our values. So that's been really helpful to inform that. In fact, back when you were at KPMG, you were involved in that work. So we look at sensitive sectors where we simply have a view that as a global organisation we will or we won't work in that space. So that's really helped us. And I think the other thing that the SDGs do is really mobilise a connection between our firm's purpose and our people. And a good example of that's happening right now with the Act for SDGs at the moment, which is a big CSR initiative, where a quarter of our workforce have volunteered to work on the SDGs on the 25th of September. So it's making it real for everyone, I think, is the key, clients and staff.
Yeah, absolutely. What about you, Andrew? Mars has well and truly integrated the SDGs, so I'm really interested to hear about the relevance to the business and how you've actually contextualised it here in Australia.
Yeah, I think it's obviously a long journey and I think the United Nations, certainly the frame up of the SDGs, enables everyone to come at it from their own approach but still have a common goal, I think. So, Mars has essentially a program called Sustainable Intergeneration, and it's a three-pronged approach around healthy planet, thriving people and nourishing well-being. And it does line up a lot with what you see here on the blocks. And I think that the best way to integrate it into your business is to make it real for your business, so that your people, your customers, your consumers, your suppliers, everyone in the extended supply chain can understand it. And I think Mars has done quite a good job at that over the years, and I think that still there's lots of opportunities to do that. And so I think the what is becoming clearer because it's it's understandable, it's relatable, it's taking responsibility where you know that you can have an impact, and I think that's been probably a key to the success of getting it going. And I think now it's about how do you get beyond the direct area of control to start more collaboration and getting beyond your direct area of control, which the SDGs do quite well.
Sure, thank you. And Lynette, what about Sunrise? Because you're at the different sort of end to what Mars is when it comes to your approach to sustainability and integrating the SDGs.
Yeah, so we're a little earlier in the journey of really being able to articulate Sunrise's sustainability impact and the way that we can make real impact in our operations. But I think the SDGs for us has been incredibly helpful as a frame for what an Australian company like Sunrise can do with a huge amount of, homegrown knowledge and expertise in various areas, but for a global business. So what the SDGs has allowed us to do is take that local knowledge and think about how to communicate it in a global context. So what role can a company like Sunrise, as an Australian company, play in achieving a greater and bigger goal? So that framework's been incredibly useful for us, even at this early stage of our journey, to be able to frame up the work that we've been doing for the last 100 years, and actually applying that more broadly throughout the businesses around the world and also through our partners. And I think, as Andrew mentioned, it's that collaboration piece, working with your partners, with your suppliers, to see what contribution you can make to that bigger global goal has been really helpful for us.
Yeah. And Lee.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So for those of you who aren't familiar with Climateworks, we're a non-profit organisation that works within the Monash Sustainable Development Institute, which is focused on the Sustainable Development Goals and how we can achieve them. Our focus at Climateworks has been on advising businesses and government as well on how to achieve SDG 13, what we now refer to as SDG 13, or the Climate Action SDG. I hope I've got that right.
Yes.
And what we've found, I mean, we've had that focus since our inception 10 years ago on how do we meet that goal? How do we get to net zero emissions in Australia, and developing pathways to get there? And what we've realised along the way is just how important it is to not only focus on that one objective, how important it is to make sure that you're thinking about the other sustainable development goals, and what the SDGs do is provide that framework to enable you to do that. A really tangible example is our own research on how we need to change to achieve net zero emissions in Australia. Includes planting a lot of trees to offset all of the emissions that we don't currently know how to remove from the economy. So there are some emissions we just don't know how to remove, like emissions associated with producing cement. And also the emissions associated with raising livestock. At the moment, we just don't know how to completely eliminate them, although there are some emerging technologies. And we saw the potential to offset those by planting a lot of trees, but there are really significant potential perverse negative outcomes that can come from planting a lot of trees, and the SDGs reveals these. They might be taking water away from other downstream uses, taking land away from food production, fundamentally changing regional communities by replacing agricultural enterprises with planting trees and managing those tree plantations. So that's really powerful, to just have a framework that says, okay, this is the bit you're focused on, or these are the bits you're focused on, but make sure that you're not losing sight of the bigger picture.
So before I sort of ask some more deep dive questions in terms of how your businesses have implemented the SDGs, just a quick show of hands, how many people sitting in the rooms, organisation or companies, talk about or try to integrate the SDGs in some shape or form? Okay, so probably about a third to a half. And how many people were aware of the Sustainable Development Goals prior to today? Okay, that's good. So we're not talking anyone's like foreign language, which is a good start, really. So a bit different to this morning, when it was a bit disappointing to see that so many people in the room, when we were listening to John Kerry, actually didn't know what the Sustainable Development Goals were. So, Andrew, I just want to touch on what you talked about with the Sustainable in a Generation plan. Within that plan, you identified and prioritised some SDGs. Could you sort of take us through how you identified them, you know, if you had to collaborate with other organisations, and then what some of the really big challenges that you faced were in identifying and I guess running your business against those SDGs?
Yeah, I think, as I said, it's a long journey in terms of doing this, and thankfully Mars is a private company, still has a private ownership, and has forever operated on the basis of some really strong principles, one of those being mutuality, which is all about everyone in the supply chain and ecosystem thriving, essentially. So when it came to the SDGs being framed up, I think there was already some natural work going on in some of those spaces, and so particularly around Healthy Planet. Obviously, we're a big supplier, a big manufacturer globally, so around things around emissions, around water use, I think have been really important in our factories, But I think as the SDGs come through, it enabled us to prioritise some things beyond our own walls in terms of land usage, which suppliers we would partner with in terms of what they're doing in terms of their sustainable practices. So I'd say the origins of the business had a lot of this mindset and mentality in place about protecting or creating a better world for a future generation, but probably hadn't mobilised it, I would say. So I think it was probably really great within the ownership of the family company and the leadership of the company, but our ability to sort of mobilise that with partnerships, I think, is probably the area that's really evolved. And I think the prioritisation piece comes down to sort of what I was touching on earlier. What's in your defined scope and wheelhouse? Where can you really touch things? So cocoa farmers is an obvious one for a chocolate company, right? Where we spend a lot of time and invest a lot of money in helping sustainable practices in cocoa farming, helping farmers in certain areas. So I myself have worked up country in Indonesia with cocoa farmers in helping them get financing to invest in fertilisers to increase their yields without expanding their land use. So things like that for us really live every day, I think, in our roles. And I think that helps us, because it's close to our wheelhouse and what we do every day, it enables some natural prioritisation. But I do think, though, as this comes out, and I think to Ali's point, you can't do any of these in isolation. It means that you need to understand sort of the cause and effects of that. But both with planet and both with people, there's a lot of interdependencies too. So I think we shouldn't think that these things are mutually exclusive. Dealing with the numbers, dealing with the first couple that you want to prioritise will have a flow-on effect to some of the others. And you may not even realise how good or bad that flow-on effect is until you partner with people. And I think that sort of then becomes really, really important. Look, some of the challenges, I think, along the way, that's the last part of the question, I think, are probably that exact thing, the prioritisation in terms of, well, is this making an impact, or we wish it was making more of an impact, or we wish we could get more people on board to make this bigger because we see sort of the benefit in it. But then I think there are really good industry sort of support coming through now, and I believe that most people in industry understand the need to do these things. Some people don't know how to get after it. And so that's where a company that's been around for 100 plus years should be able to help, and I think that would be our responsibility to anyone who's trying to get on this journey or accelerate on this journey. And there'll probably be some leapfrogging, to be fair, that companies that started this a while ago may have been much slower through the first stages than what companies who start today. So I think don't ever be apologetic would be my message, that you haven't done it all already. Nobody has. But I think the opportunity to leapfrog, to go faster now with all the knowledge and learning, willingness to collaborate, I think gives newer companies a great opportunity as well.
Yeah, and I think, Lynette, that's probably true of Sunrise in terms of, you've only recently started in this role, and it's fair to say that sustainability is a new thing for Sunrise, but you seem to have progressed very quickly in terms of your ability to identify 8 sustainable development goals that are core to your strategy. Perhaps you could take us through some of the biggest opportunities that you see, and particularly the ones around sort of zero hunger, responsible business, responsible production and consumption, and climate action, just because they are, talking at global table, they are intrinsically linked to both food and ag.
Yeah, and I mean, just to put in context where we're at in the journey, while our ability to capture and communicate where we're at in the sustainability journey is new. I was talking to Andrew about this before. What it is with Sunrise is that it's been at our core from the very beginning. So the core business and what's embedded in our DNA, we're an agricultural business at its heart. We've been working from farmers up to protect the environment, to make more from less, to use resources incredibly well. And what is new for us is putting the framework around it. So the framework is make a difference. We want to make a difference to our environment, to consumers, as well as to communities. And the SDGs has allowed us to, with the 8 that we've identified, really target, as Andrew mentioned as well, really target where our core business can actually make the most impact. So if you take the ones, Kylie, that you were just speaking about, so zero hunger is a really neat and obvious one for us to talk to. as an agricultural business that's had an incredible amount of investment in R&D in Australia to work out how to increase yields, how to decrease water use when growing a crop like rice, which is incredibly a significant challenge in a rice crop. And the R&D that we have invested in over many years has resulted in Australia being a place where you can use 50% less water than the global average to grow a rice crop. And that's pretty amazing, right? So the biggest opportunity, I guess, we see as an organisation is that we have those insights and we can share those at a more global level, and we can do that in a way which we can ensure actually makes impact across all of the SDGs. So being really clear where those interdependencies are is really, really important. You can increase yield, you can decrease water, you can do all those things, but what does it do to income, to poverty? How can we ensure that when we engage with our farmers in Vietnam or in Papua New Guinea, for example, we're actually going about that in a way which increases their economic participation as well as increasing food production and decreasing water usage. We've got a great example in Papua New Guinea, for example, where we've been operating for over 30 years, and taking that expertise to the Papua New Guinean industry to actually build an industry from scratch, but using the technology and the insights that we built here in Australia. So it's that kind of approach that's been really, really successful for us. And I guess just briefly on things like responsible consumption, one of the core parts of our business is a subsidiary called CopRice that makes pet food, high quality animal product, and it's all done from byproducts of the rice industry, and now as it's evolving and changing, it's from other crops as well. So there's almond hulls and grape skins and all those sorts of things. So it's about taking what we've done forever, just because it's part of our DNA, and actually scaling it and using that again and again in that space. Yeah. And obviously that R&D applies in a lot in the climate space as well, the work and the technology done to make sure that we're decreasing the methane emissions through practices, particular kinds of agricultural practices like direct drilling and things, and just really understanding that and ensuring that we're doing it with a view to what that goal is and the interdependencies of the other goals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess, Ben, you've probably got the other side of the challenge. KPMG's agri team works with both pre and post-farm gate clients. And so your role is obviously providing advice into those clients. How do you talk to your clients in a language that allows the SDGs to be commonly understood? And then how do you actually talk about the deniers? So, we heard this morning from John Kerry, and you see it a lot in Australia, about people denying that we've actually got the extent of the problems that we've got, particularly in regards to climate. So how do you actually translate these so that you can sell the SDGs, for want of a better word, into your clients when you're developing strategies for their business?
Yeah, look, I think as an organisation that is a consulting practice but also has an assurance offering as well, we do, I guess, two things. We help set strategy and vision, and then we come along afterwards and help people stay accountable for that strategy and vision that they've set. So both elements are really crucially important, because strategy and vision without metrics and accountability is just a dream, and you'll never get there. So for us, bringing those two pieces together, and we collaborate with Lynette and the team at Sunrise on exactly that, is important. And the way we do that really is around being true to our purpose. So to inspire confidence and empower change means we have to write thought leadership pieces that are sort of over the horizon, stretching around what targets can be in agri and food. That's why we contributed to Talking 2030 and led that publication work with NFF and Telstra. And if you take one element of that, carbon neutral by 2030, and then you go down another layer and go, okay, well, that's red meat's ambition. So you get really granular quickly, and then you come back from that and say, okay, well, if that's the vision, how does that make good business sense? And we spend a lot of time talking about the SDGs in the context of it's sustainable business practice. It makes a lot of sense to the bottom line in your business. And in fact, as you excavate your strategy and your current metrics, there is a lot of natural alignment to these 17 Sustainable Development Goals. It's just the businesses aren't thinking about it in that context. So we help them see that they're already on the track, and that is enlightening for a number of organisations. It means that they feel comfortable that they're already contributing. And then it's just a case of fine-tuning that athlete, if you like, getting them to be even fitter and more focused and a more targeted goal. And that's when the metrics come into play and the sustainable frameworks. So, if that's your mission to be carbon neutral by 2030, how do we bring that all the way back to 2020? And what are the steps you need to make along the way? How does that incorporate back into your own annual performance assessments, right through to how you're communicating with your stakeholders internally and externally? And that's when the rubber really starts hitting the road, when you're advising CEOs and chairmen around what's that statement in the annual report? How did you make the linkages to these sustainable development goals? Because when you're now, to Andrew's point, communicating to your partners in your supply chain, because the SDGs are a common language, whereas carbon neutral in your own business, you'll have different measures, and you've got to find ways to line up, because we can't do it alone, and that's what the SDGs do, I think, and that's what we focus on, really, trying to get that alignment.
Yeah, great. So, Ellie, Ben obviously touched a little bit on thought leadership, which is absolutely one of your key roles at Climateworks. Can you sort of take us through some of the perhaps high-level thought leadership pieces that you've done that actually talks about how business can integrate the SDGs and how you've used those as a framework?
Yeah, I think the example that I'd use is a piece of work that we published quite a few years ago and didn't frame specifically around the SDGs, but they would have been useful to frame that work, and that was our Deep Decarbonisation Pathways project, which basically took the SDG 13 in the lead up to the Paris Climate Change Agreement. It said, what would it look like for Australia to get to net zero? Is that better?
Yep.
What would it look like for Australia to get to net zero emissions? And I think that sort of thought leadership, translating these high-level goals and principles into something that is a bit more tangible at a national level, and then we've done that kind of work at a state level and a local level and a city level and a regional level. That's the sort of work that it's hard for individual businesses or even consultancies to do, because there's no one willing to pay for it. And so in relation to food and agriculture, we're now embarking on a piece of work. It's a 3-year program of work called Land Use Futures for Australia, which is basically looking at what does it mean to achieve the relevant sustainable development goals for the Australian food and land use system. And we're focusing specifically on SDG 3, human health and nutrition, SDG 8, livelihoods, particularly in rural and regional communities, SDG 12, responsible consumption and production, which covers how the choices food consumers make, but also waste, and then those environmental goals of climate, life on land and life in the water, 13, 14 and 15, and that provides a really useful framework to look at what are the possible alternative futures for Australia's food and land use system when assessed against those multiple goals. And it's really important that we do that against those multiple goals, because we actually don't know what it looks like to get to net zero emissions and conserve our biodiversity in the face of the onslaught of climate change, and manage our water sustainably, and have prosperous regional communities, and have healthy, nutritious people. Well-fed people who are getting the nutrition they need. We don't know what that looks like. We know what an energy sector transition looks like to get to net zero emissions, but we don't know what a land sector transition looks like. And so we, as a non-profit organisation, often backed by philanthropic funding, do that linking work to try and get it to the point where the consulting firms and the businesses can take it further and translate it into what it means for their own businesses.
Sure. So it's interesting how you're talking about the funding side. And feel free to shout out the answers because we're a relatively small group. Does anyone know approximately what the opportunity value is of the SDGs between now and 2030? So this is, think about it as the next 10 years of harvest, what value the opportunities are for achieving the SDGs. Anyone? Yep. 12 trillion. So between now and 2030, we've literally got 10 harvests, and we have $12 trillion. That's estimated to be a very, very conservative amount of money. $12 trillion worth of savings and revenues for businesses alone associated with the SDGs. And I think a lot of us, particularly the people on the panel, we know that talking to business in financial terms is a very, very, very good way of getting attention. I was telling these guys that the other day I read this report about what restricting global warming to 1.5 versus 2 would achieve. And that barrier, just that 0.5 of difference, they actually estimate is about $124 trillion of opportunity in terms of that move to clean energy, electrification, etc. So I guess, Andrew, with all of these massive financial opportunities, the ability for business to save just by embracing this own agenda, why is it that we're not seeing more businesses jump onto this? Why are they not cognizant of this huge opportunity?
In a previous role, I was a CFO, so I can speak firsthand of some of the challenges I think that business goes through in regard to it. But I think it's changed a lot. Like, I think business saw this as almost like a necessary evil to sort of, I have to invest in that because otherwise I won't look great. I do think now people, to Ben's point, business is now really seeing that this is not something that's a tick-the-box exercise. This is a massive business opportunity. And I think everyone should be thinking about it like that. But equally, I do think that beyond financials, there's massive benefits here for business. And so while I think that's a good pitch on the financials, I do think most companies now and most employees of companies, in our case we call them associates, they come to work for a purpose, and their purpose, their mission and purpose for themselves is beyond, in our case, the products we make, to am I contributing to something? And I think it can go even broader without being too complicated to say, I think people are putting more and more faith in their employer than they ever did. Because in days gone by, people would spend time at work, they'd go home with their family and they'd spend time in their community. I think there's less time in their community. I think now they try to wrap that up into what does work provide me. And I think if business can think about, we need to provide a holistic package, this can be a massive winner for talent attraction, talent retention, a purpose. And I think that's really important. And that certainly hit home in Mars. We're not perfect by any stretch. I think there's more we can do. But Mars, for a family company to commit to $1 billion of investment over the next couple of years around these goals is pretty significant. And I think Mars clearly sees it as a business decision that does good for the planet and for the people and for the next generation. So I think it's just time for people to understand that I think every organisation needs a passionate leader to help create that energy and passion behind it. If it just gets down to the CFO, no offence to CFOs, it can get stuck for a long time. So I think it needs to have a bigger purpose and then goes beyond the organisation as well, as we discussed earlier.
Yeah. And do you see the same, Ben? Like when you're seeing it, I guess, we probably do see a difference in terms of environmental and social governance integration and SDG integration between the public, the sort of private sector versus the publicly listed sector, where I guess, they can be heavily influenced by what investors decide to do. What about with the agribusiness sector? Because I think in Australia, it's other than the very large players and the Sunrises and whatnot, a lot of them are private companies. Yep. And a lot of them are pre-farm gate companies as well. So how do you see, what Andrew was saying, actually filtering through into the smaller parts of the smaller organisations in Australia?
That's a great question. I think when you
Sorry, I went off script. But,
that's all right. Look, one of the reasons why I like to work in the ag and food sector is because of the people. They are, by and large, uber passionate about the production of food and the role they play. And a small organisation, might not sit down and unpack the 17 SDGs and get into the metrics in detail. but they'll talk about, what are our values and what are we, what is core to what we do as an organisation, be it a farm with 5 workers on it, through to a private food processing company that's kicking goals and sending tomatoes all around Australia and internationally. They have at their core their values, and they talk about what's important. And that at its heart is what Andrew's saying. It's about connecting at a purpose level, why businesses are so critical to the delivery of the Sustainable Development Goal outcomes. It's going to sound a little bit preachy, but truly only businesses have this dynamic with an associate or a workforce, right? Like when goals are set and strategies are driven and performance is measured and there's a framework for all of that, then you have a way of saying, we intend to get to this North Star, how are we going? We have regular check-ins, and then we decide whether we've been successful on that journey or not, and we reward people for that. And if the behaviours aren't aligning to those outcomes, then we have conversations and say, maybe this is not the place for us to do this work together. So we've put in place processes for accountability. Now, I think every organisation has that to a greater or lesser extent, but that's why business, I think, has such a key role to play. Different industries have lent into this at different rates, and the research we did around the publication of, which is titled How to Report on Sustainable Development Goals in 2017, was really enlightening as to which industries are leading on this. And automotive and utility industries are right at the top. Agri-food doesn't feature. It's buried somewhere within the processing and manufacturing. And we have to change that because if agri-food really paid its way in terms of its impact on the planet, we would have a much higher price at the till. So the awareness that will come when we actually work out the impact of what we're doing is dramatic. And that's why the work that Lynette and the team are doing is so important, because you're actually starting to get metrics and accountability. You can tell the story, you can look for improvements, and you can be ahead of that consumer pressure. And I think the other thing we need to think about is, why is Australia so far behind? The Northern Hemisphere is leading, and maybe that's where some of the impost has been greatest, because you've got this density of population with the agri activities around it, whereas we have this isolation, right? So you can produce stuff and no one can see what you're doing, but the planet feels the impact. So we do need the metrics to come through, and we do need to start using a repeatable and common process for reporting on it, I think.
Yeah. And that's probably what Ben was saying about Sunrise is probably a great segue, Lynette, for you to maybe take us through actually what are these opportunities that you've harnessed that's obviously contributing to that $12 trillion worth of opportunity, and how that's actually played out for Sunrise.
Yeah, the example I think, Ben, that Ben's talking about is, so there's a number of opportunities from the employee proposition perspective that Andrew spoke about, which is really key. There's opportunities from the investor perspective, which I think is really important as well. We're an ASX-listed company, and it is really important to our investors now, which is great to see, to make sure that we are doing the right thing. But the piece that I think you're talking about, Kylie and Ben at KPMG have helped us with, is that consumer proposition. So we've worked with KPMG on a blockchain-enabled trial to really make sure that we can understand the value proposition of our product from the beginning to the end. And I think the biggest opportunity in this space is to rebuild trust in that space for consumers, so that they can start to see the value of the farming practices or whatever the purchasing practices are, but to use that technology that people like KPMG have been able to help us with to build that level of trust. We're in a situation where trust is at a bit of a minimum in some institutions. You're right, I think that employers are highly trusted. So from an employee proposition, they look to us to make sure that we are operating in a really sustainable way, that we're very genuine about it. And what this type of trial has done for us from a consumer perspective is allowed us to be able to tell that story to consumers. But also, it's held us to account. I think Ben's point about being accountable is absolutely key. The danger in this space, and people talk about greenwashing, it has the ability to really detract trust in the sector, or it has the complete opposite ability, which is where we're focused, which is to actually put really robust systems on ourselves to make sure that we're accountable. Using the SDGs for that accountability is one way to be able to, as a sector, to build trust in this space, and that's where I see the main opportunity, I think, from an SDG perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, Ely, I understand that recently Climateworks ran a natural capital summit, which would obviously go to the heart of a lot of what we're discussing right now in terms of the SDGs and agriculture. And that through this, you've also become involved in the Sustainable Finance Initiative. Maybe you could take us through what that is and how, for those agri-food companies in the room today, how they can get a bit more involved in that initiative.
Yeah, so our CEO, Anna Skarbek, is on the steering committee of the Australian Sustainable Finance Initiative, and that's an initiative where all of the big four banks and big insurers and big superannuation funds have come together and committed to reorient the finance sector to align with the Sustainable Development Goals, really. And the main thing that we're seeing there is just how serious the commitment is. Those organisations that are participating are sending their CEO or head of institutional bankings to every one of those meetings. Yeah. And so there really is appetite and commitment to change the finance sector to align with the SDGs. And that's based on work internationally that's had a really powerful impact in that space. I think some of the key insights that we've received from being involved in that is that there's really no shortage of capital looking for SDG compatible investments. At that summit we ran, the thread was, the world is awash in capital looking for more sustainable investments. And another thread from that summit was that agriculture is a really good place for those investments to look because there's a revenue stream. So some of those investors have looked to things like investing in rainforests, and it's hard to find the revenue stream. There have been big deals announced where they have found revenue streams through textile production and supporting small industries amongst rainforest dwelling communities. But agriculture is an incredibly powerful place to look for investments that both have a revenue stream through the food and fibre production and a sustainable development outcome through revegetation or whatever, changing to more sustainable production practices. And there are two big challenges that come out of those conversations thus far. One is, that's a new way of doing business. Creating those SDG-aligned investments is a new way of doing business, and it means bringing together a whole lot of different revenue streams to make a business case that stacks up. And what we heard at that summit was that there's a shortage of people who are capable of creating those deals. The other thing we've heard, which I think has already been mentioned, is a lack of fit-for-purpose systems for actually quantifying and valuing what does sustainable agriculture look like, and a proliferation of different competing systems that just bamboozles an investor. So we've got all these investors wanting to change the way they invest, and then we've got all these sort of fragmented, piecemeal systems for quantifying what does a sustainable investment look like, and investors can't become experts in what does sustainable agriculture look like. They need the systems to be able to say, okay, well, we're going to only invest in the same way that they do in the property sector. We're only going to invest in 6-star property assets or 7-star property assets. They need some sort of system to enable that. And at the moment, that's a little bit immature. So those are some of the key things that we are hearing about, the challenges to harnessing that incredible opportunity that comes from investors committing to change.
Yeah. Now, I am conscious that we've got a big red countdown clock in front of us, which is glaringly obvious. And I actually just want to make sure that we're giving substantial time to you guys to ask some questions of these guys. But before we do that, I think, where we've gotten to, there's obviously huge challenges, there's obviously huge opportunities as well. But overall, the SDGs are about creating long-term value. And by long-term, we do mean well past the 10 years that the SDGs technically go to. So I'd like to know just briefly from each of you, what would be your one message to this audience today about what they can do to go back to their businesses, next week after Global Table's finished, and really work at adopting the SDGs. You want to take it first?
I'll have a crack. Yeah. Look, I think the most important SDG for me is the last one. So it's about partnership and collaboration. And if you take away from this talk and go back to your business and think about who do we depend on? We have our own processes in our own organisation, but who up and down our supply chain are we depending on, and how do we have this conversation with them? Because the only way to properly drive change is to think about that sort of product passport, if you like. So what is it you're doing from start to finish, and the impact that has on the planet? Because that's going to change, to Ely's point, your conversation with your financiers, your shareholders. It's going to also change your conversation with your consumers. So that's the key: collaboration and think whole of supply chain.
What about you, Andrew?
I'd personalise it a little bit and say, if it's not you going back creating energy around this, who is? And if you don't feel like your organisation or your business understands it, then you can be the one that starts it. So I think to my message earlier, it doesn't matter where you've come from or where you've got to today is your chance to sort of reset and take that message back into your organisation. Find people that are passionate about it. You only need 2 or 3 people in most organisations to really make a massive impact. And then I think you'll find some natural things. You might find there's actually been some really great stuff already going on, like Lynette spoke about, but it's not being publicised. And then that momentum will really kick in, but it won't be linear. So you get great momentum, everyone gets great progress on their water-saving initiatives for the first 3 years, and then they're like, where's the next initiative come from? So it does get harder over time, but I would just get started, take some energy back with you, and find those others in your organisation that have a passion about it, and believe that you can make a difference, because you can.
You, Lynette.
Mine's actually a bit of an extension of Andrew's. I think we just have to remember that businesses are just a collection of people working around a common corporate vision. And my advice to everyone at Sunrise, and it's the same as what I'd say to you guys and your businesses, is just expand that vision. Like, just look up. Find the thing that makes you passionate, find the thing that aligns with what your business does every day, and focus on that. Because as Andrew's point, you will find the passion there, and that sort of gets it started. But don't try and do something completely left field. Find the thing that crosses over where your business strategy crosses over, because then you make money for the business and you have impact for the world. And it's incredibly powerful when you show someone in a marketing team that their superpower is they can, make consumers do something really sustainable, and they realise they're getting paid for it. It's kind of quite cool. So if you can find that superpower and the passion and align that to your business, it's an incredibly powerful thing.
Really?
I think the beautiful thing about the Sustainable Development Goals is they help people like you navigate from the thing that everyone can agree on, which is a better world for everyone, and how do we actually do that, and the complexity of actually doing that. And so I think the challenge and the message that I would send to you is jump on the opportunity presented by the Sustainable Development Goals to harness everyone out there who says, yes, I want to invest in, I want to support as a CEO or CFO our company contributing to a better world, and then use it as the rigor it provides in how you will get there, and get there without, doing the thing that your business can contribute to without harming something else.
So with that, because we are a small team, you're going to move around with the mic?
Yeah, sure.
Questions?
Yeah, thank you. So I'll just shoot some questions through. These have all come through from the floor.
Sure.
So the first one is maybe we'll throw it to you, Eli. Start down your end. It's just around how do you think Australia is doing generally at engaging our marginalised communities in this discussion and looking at the impact we're having there?
I will say it's not something that we've specifically worked on, but it is something that we've worked on a very narrow part of for that summit we ran, which was focused around natural capital. Now, natural capital is a buzzword, and what does it mean? It means treating the environment like an asset, like any other asset, and recognising that we depend on it. And in Australia, obviously, treating any discussion about how we manage our land and how we manage our environment needs to include traditional owners, and both as land managers and as traditional owners of land that they don't manage. And we found it incredibly challenging. I think the take-home message for us is that if you are going to do that properly, and you have to, it's really resource intensive, and you have to commit the resources to do it properly. Keep that issue front and centre. In terms of how Australia is doing more broadly, it's not really something that we've done work on, so I'd be reluctant to cast judgment on that. I might pass
I can probably help a bit. So SDSN Australia, that Monash Sustainable Development Institute is somewhat associated with, they released a report, I think it was the very start of this year, called Transforming Australia. They've got a website as well. I highly recommend going and looking at it. It goes through all of the SDGs and shows how Australia is tracking against those SDGs, and it's suffice to say that there are some that we're doing really well at. So quality education is something that Australia is quite strong in, but there are some that we are failing miserably at, and climate action is one of those. I wouldn't be able to recite in detail what all of them are, but it's Transforming Australia, I think .com.au or .org.au. Absolutely go and look at it. You can drill down to the finite details around the targets and indicators of the SDGs. I will caveat that with saying that it's one of the challenges we've talked about here is that there is a broad challenge around reporting on the SDGs and understanding what that means. So capturing a holistic view of the SDGs is very challenging if we don't have material out there from business or individuals on how they're using the SDGs. So the more that we see companies talking about the SDGs on their websites, integrating it into their annual reports, the better understanding we'll get as to how Australia is actually tracking against the SDGs.
Great. So the next one's really about, maybe I'll send it to you, Ben, and then if anyone else wants to chime in, it's really about how you're advising businesses to think about engaging with specific goals that resonate with their business. And the second part of the question is about transforming core business and thinking about how it sits inside what you're doing every day versus allocating a budget to a specific goal that you might, support an NGO that's working in that space or something like that. So how do you advise clients in that space?
Well, I think the first thing to do is really to take your own strategy and metrics that you have already in place, and then just cross-check them against the SDGs. So the assets that are there on the Sustainable Development Goals site and all the metrics that sit under each of the goals makes it really easy to currently do that sort of stock take, if you like, around where your organisation is vis-a-vis the Sustainable Development Goals. So then you know where you are, and then the next question is how do you go from there forward? What we find is really critical is being able to clearly articulate how the strategy of your organisation aligns to some of the Sustainable Development Goals. Like, as Andrew was saying, just start personally, start small and make steps. You're not going to line up to all of them, so work out which ones are most critical and are most aligned to what you're doing. And then that's a communication piece that the leaders, we advise, our chairman and our CEOs and clients, you've got to start bringing that into your vernacular, your language, and your reports, but also internally as well. Tie that into your corporate social reporting and sustainability reporting that you're doing. That's the message above the photocopier, all that kind of stuff. And when the CEO's out meeting clients, they're talking about it was really great because here's a partner that's helping us with our Zero Hunger Accord or whatever the focus is. You see this best in Queensland where everyone's focused on the reef. It's a uniting cause. So look for that. And then in terms of methods and systems, I think really this does come back to, as Lynette was talking about, how are you going to measure things that might be outside of your organisation's data set? Because to really make transformational impact with the Sustainable Development Goals, you're part of a wider supply chain. So you need to work out what data you're going to put forward and what data you're going to expect from others to be able to tell this total supply chain story. So that brings us back to the collaboration point.
And if you want a really easy tool, the UN Global Compact, when the SDGs first were all agreed, they released a tool called the SDG Compass. It's available on our website. You can just Google it. It's a whole website. It's actually one of the most simple tools that you could ever use to understand how to make the SDGs applicable to your business. And it just takes you through a very stepped process of how you go about identifying what SDGs are relevant for your business.
And I'd just make one other comment about the partnership piece. I think we have, as businesses, need to understand how important partnerships are. We shouldn't be reinventing work that's been done really well in the civil sector. I think
absolutely.
that there's some fantastic work in the hunger space, in the poverty space, and organisations are expert in that. So find the people that are experts and collaborate, because businesses shouldn't evolve into something that we're not, but we should partner with the experts and do that really well.
Yeah, I agree.
Sure. I think this might be the final question.
Still got 4 minutes.
Great. Second last question in that case. It's really around a recognition that the SDGs will stand to benefit future generations, probably more so than us. How should companies be thinking about engaging the next generation in their decision making and as they look to implement a strategy around alignment with SDGs?
Who wants to start?
You look lost, Ben, so I'll take that. Look, I think, yeah, exactly. I think, firstly, I think back to Ben's previous sort of question, education is a big piece, I think, of entrenching this into organisations so that it's not a side project. And I think with education, through your entire workforce, or let's say your graduates coming in to your organisation, I think what you do is if you can get a 360 education program going on where you're actually learning from those that have this more front of mind, and it is actually, I think the younger generation than us are more passionate about this because they can see where it's going or how long it's taken to get going. So I think if a business has a purpose to talk about tomorrow as much as it talks about today, and everything we do today is for tomorrow, which I'm fortunate enough to have in my organisation, then I think that you're on the right track, because it means that you're not making decisions just for the here and now. You're understanding what it means to be part of the packaging covenant, what it means to be part of Lion's Share, which is a thing that Mars has invested in around wildlife preservation of animals. You can look that one up, it's actually quite good as well. I think that enables you to sort of speak with some credibility, to have some credibility in your organisation to say, we aren't just making decisions for today or for this quarterly share price. And I think if that becomes part of stories for organisations, whether they're private or public, shareholders will believe it and start to want to be part of it and want to invest behind that, because, as we said, there is good business in that. And I think the sooner we can get away from quarterly reporting and expectations, the easier all of this becomes, and we unlock it. Now, we're not going to change that part of the world, I'm sure, but I do think listening to the new people coming in to your organisation or below, and even having these teenavators today, it's like such a brilliant idea. My kids are going to get a lecture tonight when I get home about what they've been doing during the day, because it's just so much energy, isn't it? And it's so much spontaneity that we need in business, because over time and over decades you can get a bit tired of things, and I think that's what we need to make sure that we're fostering.
Can I say, don't underestimate the role of activism, right? Like, you only have to look at Greta Thunberg and what she's done, and then I think back to, which unfortunately, Andrew, wasn't only 3 years ago or 8 years ago, but 5. I look back on when I was in my teens and then in my early 20s, and in my teens it was all around saving the whales and the big Greenpeace movements, the big boats that Greenpeace had to stop whaling. And then it was about CFCs and banning CFCs, and all of those things eventually happen. They take time, but activism played a massive role in that. So do not underestimate the role that youth activists play in influencing investors, in influencing what people are going to do in their lives, because it's that generation, it's the kids who are Greta Thunberg's age who are going to fundamentally shift how the world operates in 10 years' time.
Yep. I left this morning and walked over 2 placards on our balcony for my kids coming to do the climate march.
The climate strike. Yep.
These are the people, Cal, that I want to work in my organisation in 10 or 15 years' time. So these 17 goals, that's what they think about, that's what they talk about. We were having this conversation before the session. They're up on the walls at school. If they're not up on the walls in your organisation, or they're not how you communicate when you're recruiting, then you're not talking to the essence of the people. To Lynette's point, they want to turn up at work and do purposeful work. You've got to have this dialogue featuring in your employment strategy.
And I just might add one thing quickly. I think Andrew mostly covered this, but I think to that question, bring the next generation into the process in a way that gives them a voice, because that voice is so powerful. We've seen that with the climate strike and with Greta, and so powerful. And the other thing is, I think, recognise that all the people in our organisations, or many of the people in our organisations, have kids, and they are part of the next generation. And so it's not like the people in our organisation don't care about the next generation. They do. We should be talking about that.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. I think that might be all we have time for this afternoon, and I'm very conscious that I'm fast becoming the least popular guy in the room because glasses are beginning to chink outside. I'd like to extend a huge thank you to Kylie and her panel. If we can have a huge round of applause, please.